Right. Thank you. Hello. I paid them for that previous slide. Um, so I spent about 20 hours on this talk. 19 of it was on this front cover, making Batman and the Angular 2 forms. So this isn't the exact quote. If any Batman people, fans, want to pick up on my incorrect quote, I've called it the hero we need, but not the one that we deserve. So rather than the hero that we deserve, but not the one that we need, because that wouldn't make sense. So this talk is kind of about Angular 2 reactive forms, so we're going to kind of go quite deep into it. Any questions afterwards? Feel free. That's my Twitter handle. I currently work at a company called Progress, formerly known as Telerik. We're kind of in this Telerik by Progress transition at the moment. Who's heard of ng-migrate? Has anyone in here heard of ng-migrate? Cool, we're doing a good job. So this is a unofficial migration guide for Angular 1 to Angular 2. So there's loads of posts and stuff on here where you can say, I know about controllers, how do I do a controller or a directive or a particular thing for a form in Angular 1. You click on it and it will tell you how to do it in Angular 2. So that's a work in progress project. I also do online courses, training, Ultimate Angular. So we're going to talk about Angular 2 forms. Hopefully this will go right. Hopefully. So there's two types of forms. Template-driven forms, which are like what we used to in Angular 1, where you create all these ng model bindings. Ng submit and all this kind of thing. And then there's the reactive approach, which is what we're going to look at today. So who's not done the reactive approach? Cool, so hopefully this will give you a good intro. So the first thing I want to talk about is just the design of these forms. So in Angular 1, they were extremely difficult. Like if you wanted to create a reusable component, it can work quite well if you create a directive or something that's then embedded, but then you want to sort of tie in the validation to the parent, and it ends up becoming a bit of a mess. So these allow us to create very componentized forms. So this is a huge benefit with the new architecture. It's got a focus on controls. We'll come on to what a specific control is shortly. And more importantly, dynamic forms. So this was an old joke because years ago I was tasked with creating dynamic forms in Angular 1, and now we can do it in Angular 2. Had we had it a few years ago, I wouldn't have left the job. We can also tie them in more easily with observables. And the most important thing is that we don't have to do stuff like this anymore. If you want to, I will somehow post the slides. There's loads of like live code stuff in this, so it's not easy to put it in a PDF and say, here's the slide. But I don't know if you can read that. I've got a blog on like fundamentals for reactive forms and the model-driven, template-driven forms, which those two links there will give you an insight if some of this stuff goes a bit too like deep for like what we're trying to do. So yeah, there's some terrible Batman photos in here. The actual application that I'm going to show you has nothing to do with Batman, so I'm sorry. So from a high-level perspective, we have reactive forms module. These are kind of like the main building blocks. Then we have these things like form control, if you've browsed the Angular 2 docs, form groups, form arrays, form builder. So these kind of are like the main building blocks that we would go to and actually use when building the Angular 2 forms and the validators. So lower level, when you start clicking on the documentation, you might see all these crazy words like ControlValue Accessor and abstract control and all these big underscores, and you think, okay, I've gone too deep, I'm going to go back a level. So we're going to kind of start at the top and then go down. So by the end of this talk, we're hopefully going to achieve these things. Let me blow this up a little bit. So we're going to try and understand form groups, form arrays, form controls. Then we're going to implement some form group validation. Then we're going to understand why form arrays are amazing. form controls, custom form controls, and a ControlValue Accessor, and we're going to show you a real application. We're going to break it into small pieces and then walk through them, and then I'm going to show you the application. If anyone's a Batman fan, this was a pun from Batman Begins, so let's begin. So what I'll do real quickly before we even start, this is the application which demonstrates the concepts that I've just listed. So we're going to walk through them one by one, should we have time. So for instance, I can do John. If I, whatever, I'll leave it like that. Angular 2 doesn't have built-in email validation, so that's why we don't get it. But it says the field is required. Now, if I do Todd at motto.com, let's just say, and then if I do this, if I spell my name wrong, we get this error saying that the emails must match. So we're going to learn how to do this like cross-control validation. We can obviously fill these in. Now, if anyone's ordered Domino's pizza, you probably recognize something like this. We can optionally select the size. You can see that the pizza size is changing down here. So you can use these. These are using radio buttons underneath, so you can actually just use my left and right arrow keys to actually select between the two. The toppings, these will use checkboxes underneath. We can use form tabs, not form tabs, keyboard tabs to basically tab, press the space bar, and then these will float down from heaven. Now, if you're feeling extra hungry, we can add another pizza. You see we've got pizza 1, pizza 2, etc., etc. We can add some more toppings. Girlfriend's feeling hungry too. I'm going to add one with just some bacon. And we're just going to animate, hopefully you can see that okay, between the two at the top. So yeah, we're going to walk through how to build this stuff, I hope. So it's Jürgen actually specifically told me don't make anything that's probably available on YouTube, so I apologize, you can blame him if it's too advanced. So first thing is we import the reactive forms module. Let me try and blow this up a bit, nope. There we go. So we can import this reactive forms module. This basically gives us the non-template driven forms module. You've probably seen the ng module before, so this is where we actually need to include things. We just simply pass it in as an import, so that's as easy as you just need to include the module. You have access to all these things that are built into that application that I just showed you. So for the setup side, before we go into crazy mode, we're gonna just cover some groundwork. So we've got form groups, form arrays, form controls. So to actually create this, what we need to do is just import the form group, the form array, and the form control. Now, when we want to create, this is the actual code. Some bits I've taken out because it's like boilerplate and wiring up around the application. But this is the actual code for the application that I've just shown you for ordering pizzas. So we have this.form. Now we're going to create a form group. Then this is just essentially just an object level. So if you imagine an object and you have a property inside that object called details, then we're going to create another form group here. This one's going to have a name, and we're going to initialize it with a new form control with just an empty string. And then our pizzas are going to be a form array. So when we're adding new pizzas, we get each new pizza choice that we can step through. So if you think about them in an object representation, from the top we've got form, details, and pizza, and then all of these live inside details. So when we go up here, it's kind of the same hierarchy but binding to the actual templates. So the first one, binding the initial form group, we had the form group name is details, everything's nested inside. I've obviously cut out a lot of stuff in here. And then the form array name is the pizzas. So this is the basic setup for it. Now, we can use something called form builder, which is essentially, now that you know how to do this version, we can do a cleaner version. So the template is exactly the same. Now, the only thing we need to do is actually inject this form builder here, so we can just switch out an import and inject it here. And we can convert the code to this. The only thing I've added here is a validator, so we've actually just made these required. So when I flick between the two, you can see that they're pretty much the same, but we're just using one form builder. This one's a group, this one's a group, this one's an array with an initial array inside. Everything is a control, so this will make more sense in a second. A form control is, interestingly enough, a control. So a form control is just like one level of specific thing that you want. So for instance, my name in a box is one control. That's one binding from the form APIs to the HTML. A form array is just a collection. It's just an array of controls. So you just start to think about actual proper native JavaScript at this point. And then a form group is a group of controls, like an object of different controls. So everything kind of is just a nice wrapper for these controls. And then form builder, when we want to use shorthand-ish sugar syntax, we can use these to basically wrap them instead. So the first piece that we actually demoed was, I'm using the same Chrome thing, so these will zoom in and out, was the fact that these emails don't match. That's the volume button. So field is required. If I type something, it's got to match. So if I do, yeah, we saw it. I don't need to recap. So how we do this is something called abstract control. So it's essentially an abstract class which all of the form control group things just basically inherit from. So I've called it the mothership. It's kind of like the controller. Ask and you shall receive. This will become apparent, so you can just ask for it, and then we're going to actually go and say, I want this email field, I want the other email field. We can do some comparison checks, and then actually return the validation states. So going back to this, we have the form group, and you'll notice here we have details. Wrong one. There we go. So we're in the details level. Now, the only change we've made is we actually have this validator now. So we've created a reference to a function, which will come up below. So we're specifying validator equals email matcher. So the email matcher is going to do all of our validation. Now, when we pass it at this level, we can query essentially any of these name, email, confirm, phone, address, postcode. So we can query them with a control. So if you imagine this is an email.typescript file, email matcher, should I say, we can import this abstract control. This is done just for the actual type checking. You don't necessarily need it if you don't want to. And we're going to export this as like a validation function. Now, if you've done validation in Angular 1, you see there's no dollars and weird stuff, hacks going on here. This is like super, super clean API. So what we essentially do is get the control for that details level, and all we're saying here is go and get me the email, go and get me the confirm. There we go. So go and get me these two. If they don't exist, just return null, which means that there isn't an error. Now, all we need to do here is just return, and then we just check the value. So email.value, which will give us whatever we've typed in. Then the second box, whatever we typed in again, will give us the value. If we do have an error, so those are not the same, we return this no match true. So that's when we can actually bind this to the templates. So again, this is a simplified version of our template. So we have the details. Then inside we have email and confirm. So everything's kind of object level. So we want to implement this message that the emails must match. Now, the way that we do that is we don't query the individual inputs. We go up to the group level. You can do them still via the individual inputs, which is why on here it says field is required. So we've actually got validation on the single input and the group as well. So if that has an error, and this form API is a lot cleaner than it used to be, so we could do form.get. It's going to get me that details control object. We can check if it's been interacted with, and we can also check if it has this error called no match. So this error no match is what we returned here if there's no error. So all of the code, by the way, will be available on the GitHub for this project, so you can go and grab it and play around with it afterwards. So that's how we basically implement the validation and show the errors. So if I do Todd and then Todd 3, that's all it's doing, just comparing the values. So the next piece is the form array. So this doesn't need to be particularly like complex. You don't need to think about it like some crazy API. If you imagine just plain JavaScript, we can have an array, my pizzas, empty array. Now let's say our definition object for our pizzas was just an object, and we're going to initialize every pizza choice with the size of small. So when we actually go here, and I can refresh, you can kind of see. There you go. So it's already initialized as small. So this is just JavaScript thinking. And we're going to want an array of toppings. So when we click on buttons, the toppings get populated. Now, if I wanted to add something to this my pizzas array, sorry, I have to keep flicking between bumping font sizes. We just use JavaScript method push, so we can just push something into array. That's pretty simple. If I decide that I don't want that pizza anymore, I can press the delete button. So if I add a few more pizzas, see these little red trash icons, so I can delete them. So if in plain JavaScript, what we want to do is just call splice. So what we would typically do is get the index, and we just splice it out and just remove it from the array. Obviously, these are mutable methods. We like the immutable methods going forward for like actual JavaScript. So just referencing this again, we have the form, the details, and the pizzas. And notice this one is a form array. Now, what we're going to do, this is the Angular version. So in our previous, when we set up the form, we had this array of empty strings, and we had this validators.required. So this is the actual Angular implementation. We've got a pizza group object here, and we've got a toppings, and we're just going to initialize an empty array inside of here. Now, some of this is implementation level deep, so I've got like a few different components that add all these dynamically, but these are the main component blocks that bring it all together. So you don't need to look at bindings and all these things. So if you imagine we're inside those add the pizza group component, and we're pressing the plus add the new pizza button, what we're going to do is return a new group. So because it's an object and we've created this group here, these are just single form controls. So we're going to return a new group, and again, all we need to do is just reference the control, and just like plain JavaScript, we just push, and it just adds it to the array. Now again, I'll show you the template piece first. So we've got the ng4. We're going to do let I equals, oops, wrong one. There we go. Some are down, some are right. It's complex. Let I equals index. So that will basically create an index variable in the current context scope. Then all we're going to do is pass it in as I to the remove pizza. So it's just going to give us the index. So when this function gets called, the remove pizza, that's all that's doing. And then instead of splice, all we're doing is just calling the Angular version, which is remove at. So when I press the trash can, it gets deleted. When we press plus, it gets added. So that's the Angular implementation. This is the actual component. So everything's kind of being passed down one-way binding. When we change an active pizza and you see them swap in and out, that's what's happening with the different events. Custom form controls. So this is the snazzy part, which I like. So at the moment, let me just recap. So at the moment, we've covered this top section with the different inputs. We've covered these two, which are being validated against each other, A and B, for example. We've just covered how to add stuff to an array. It doesn't matter what it is. You can create your own form groups and just pass them to an array. I'm just creating groups of pizzas with an empty array of toppings. Now, each component will actually render out a list of toppings, and you can see that when I start to add them, these are also getting added into the array. So underneath these, they're actually using something called ControlValue Accessor. So underneath here, we actually have checkboxes. So I think, there we go. So you can see you can't really see it on there. On my screen, if everyone wants to come and look, the chili one has a darker gray. So it's currently being focused by my tab. So when I press the space bar, that's then highlighted, and and they interact like actual form controls. And then we can go and tab through and reverse them should we need to. Similarly with the pizzas, These are radio buttons, so we don't want to obviously select more than one size for a pizza, so it's just a radio. With radio buttons, you can use your left and right arrow keys. So that's all we do. We can just change that. They actually change all of these down here. So you've got small pizza, large pizza, etc. So let's go and do this. This is what the, back up again. There we go. This is what the component looks like. So this component kind of has two roles. It's got a component level where it will determine the size of the pizza, but we're also binding a particular form control from our group that we created at the beginning. So we need to essentially, when we change these radios, we want to tell our form that something's changed. So we're kind of creating this behind-the-scenes synchronization. So we'll start off simple and then add piece by piece. So we've got the pizza size component. It's going to be an array of strings, large, medium, small, very simple. Now what we want to do is, this is like 10% of the actual code. We'll show you some more as we continue. So again, we're going to be iterating over the sizes and capturing the index if we need to. And this gives you basically the size in the actual DOM, large, medium, and small, which is just cut off. So that's fine. I mean, you might be thinking, okay, I could just add like a brackets click event, and then it will propagate an event of what I chose back up. However, if we wanted to introduce things like being able to use the keyboard, for example, accessibility, blah, 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 because we all love accessibility nowadays, then we want to actually have direct write access to that particular control. So in the previous example where we used an abstract control and compared the two values, we can essentially write, we did email.value equals confirm.value. So we can actually have direct write access to this. So if we wanted to add an input to basically do this for us, you can see here this is for the pizza selector, large, medium, or small. So we're going to add a radio button. Some of these bindings will become more clear. So we have on blur, on change, and on focus, and all of them are passing the current size. So you can see we have, oh my god, there we go. No. We have the size up here that we're currently iterating over. Now, this is where we can introduce ControlValue Accessor to basically allow us to have direct write access to the control that we've just bound. So this, can't blow it up anymore. This is the interface from the documentation. So we have four methods: write value, register on change, register on touched, set disabled state. We're not actually using this one because we've got a radio and we're pre-selecting small, so we don't actually need it because it's set by default. So what we can do is essentially, this is in the pizza size component. So we've got the component, it's got the sizes, it's looping over them. Now we can import this ControlValue Accessor. We can also import the ngValue Accessor. This is the funky part. So this basically registers the class underneath as a provider, and we use this multi-true to basically allow the methods that we create that we create below will be allowed to use for the ControlValue Accessor. Read the docs, it doesn't make sense to me explaining it. This forward ref piece is basically because it's an ES6 class here, so classes are not hoisted like JavaScript functions, so we just forward ref it. I think it's still experimental because hopefully there might be a better way of doing this in the future. So the first change is we have this implements ControlValue Accessor piece here. Now we're going to set up some internal definitions on model change, on touch, and then a value. So this value is what we're going to be writing to. So when we implement this, if we compare this to our interface of the ControlValue Accessor, we need to actually write some code ourselves to implement these functions that we want. So register on change is when the control receives the change event. So this might be when we set an initial value of small from above. We're going to have a model change value. So the function gets passed in by the ControlValue Accessor, and we basically assign it to this internal onModel change. So we have onModel change here. The onTouched is basically the same as this, but not a change event. It's a touch event. Sorry. Then when we have the right value, so this is where the piece comes from to the element. Yeah. So this is where we get a control value come in, and we're setting this dot value, which will be the value from the arguments, passed to the DOM element. So this basically, if I scroll down, no, I haven't even. Yeah, there we go. Value equals size. So we're updating this value property here. Sorry about that. When we have an onChange, so when the user has actually changed something, so we can basically implement the model change from data coming into the component. So if we change something via like set value or patch value or whatever in the parent, when this changes, one of these functions will get called. When the user interacts, so when I click on large, for example, this onChange function is being called, which gives us this. We then set our model value again, but we're also passing the internal change back to the control. So that's the model change, onModel change, which is this one, which the ControlValue Accessor gives us. It's kind of a weird ASCII equal. It's hard to explain in a talk, man. So yeah, what do we got? So this is kind of it's mostly of the code. Now, because I've used a label, we're actually able for the labels. Because we're using a label, if you wrap something like a checkbox or a radio in the label, they will automatically focus the input. So if we inspect element real quick, no, that's not what I want. Oh my gosh. Where are you? We'll go for this one. There we go. So if I click on small, you can see this ng-reflect checked equals true. So the form control is then adding and removing these values based on the user input, which, because we're having direct write access to the form control, when we make the change, if I delete the rest of these, when we make the change, you can see this medium pizza here. Because it's all bound and synchronized with the form object, everything that we do is up to date and live. I think I've got 2 minutes. It's red. That was kind of it. I know it's quite a lot to get through. I haven't posted the code yet, but it will be available. I can't zoom in anymore, it's not letting me. I'll tweet this link out and hashtag the NGBE, but the pizza app and all the demo code will be available on there. What's funny? That was the end of my talk. Yeah.